So welcome, and yeah, thanks for joining us on what I hope will be a series of panel discussions on various topics to do with data integration and intelligent technologies. For the first of our panels, I'd like to welcome a number of individuals who've got a lot of experience in the field of data, information analytics. We'll ask them all to introduce themselves in a short while and a bit about their background and current roles. But I'd like to introduce Joel Clark from BIFA, Head of Business Intelligence, Graham McDermott from Temp Cover, Chief Data Officer and Data Protection Officer at Temp Cover, Stuart Robinson, who's independent advisor on all things data analytics, and my co-conspirator here at Composable, David Proctor, one of the other directors and founders of Composable. So guys, wonder if you could briefly introduce yourself and your roles, the organisations that you work for or work with, and tell us a bit about what your proudest moment is as a leader in the space, in the data space. And perhaps we could start with Joel to start with.
Hi there. Thanks, Brian. So Joel Clark, head of, I was introduced actually as head of business intelligence. I'll come back onto that. I'm head of data and analytics, and I'll jump straight in with the fact that that is probably one of my proudest moments. Is I was head of BI at a company called BIFA, a very large company. Well, I say very large, medium-sized, FTSE 250. Capitalization about 1.3 billion, 10,000 employees, working across 95% of postcodes in the UK. You'll probably recognise us from our red bins and our red trucks. But actually moving that organisation from thinking about BI to that broader data and analytics piece is what I would say is one of my prouder moments. Just getting that organisation thinking more broadly than just reporting.
Great, thank you, Graham.
Following that, I'm Graham McDermott. I'm Chief Data Officer and Data Protection Officer at Temp Cover. Temp Cover are a sort of small insurance broker. They specialise in vehicle insurance for anywhere between 1 hour and 28 days. So we don't do annual. We only do very short-term cover, for which there is, quite a big market for, particularly, during the pandemic and post-pandemic. Have collected lots of data, and but saying that, they would argue that they hadn't done that much with it until a couple of years ago. So they probably reported on it, so a bit like Joel's comment, but haven't really done a huge amount in terms of exploiting it. And that's when I joined. Prior to that, I've probably spent the last sort of 10 years as director of data, CDOs at a variety of organisations, most of them insurance and financial services. As my background is in actuarial, which is very much insurance-based data analytics, and that's where I sort of started my career.
Cool, thank you, Graham. Stuart,
hi, Brian. So Stuart Robinson. I've been in and around data estates for most of the last 3 decades, either designing them, building them, supporting them, or tearing my hair out with them. Started my career integrating ERP and CRM systems to broader application estates, and data's really been at the heart of everything that I've done when I look back on my career. So I've been a software engineer, technical architect, consulting delivery leader, in sort of systems integrators and Big Four world. I was the chief data officer essentially at a FTSE 50 medical devices firm, but I'm currently an independent advisor at Blue Robin. So I work with organisations to help them think through, drive benefit and advantage through their data, through better use of their data. And proudest moment, there are lots. One standout is probably helping a public sector logistics organisation take a more data-driven approach to how they prepare for a large ERP implementation. So I led a team which focused on sort of procure to pay and contract management processes, and helped that organisation clear out £1.3 billion worth of invoices on hold. So given that that's essentially the processes which enable public money to be spent traceably and efficiently, and to leave that organisation, fundamentally strengthened to be able to drive confidence and efficiency in how they work. Yeah, I've got a bit of a kick out of that. It was good. Really enjoyed it.
Great. And David.
Yeah, good afternoon and welcome all as well from myself. But I'm David Proctor. I'm one of the directors at Composable. I've had more years in the industry than I'd care to count. I'm an ex-CTO of Challenger Bank, ex-senior manager in consultancy. I've worked with most industry areas, and my forte, I guess, over the years has always been data and integration. In the early days, mainly integration, and latterly more of the data coming into play as well. So that's me. Oh, proudest moment. Oh, proudest moment.
Go on.
Yeah, no. My proudest moment had to be actually getting Challenger Bank through the FCA approvals in terms of its application estate and the data underneath that, because that was probably the most significant challenge I've had in my career so far. So that was good fun.
Great. So I wanted to move on. Graham, perhaps we'll start with you on this one. And I don't know if you covered off your proudest moment, but feel free to chip that in if you want to. But what does data modernisation mean to you and the organisations that you've worked with? And is there a difference, or how does data modernisation relate to digital transformation, which seems to be still a topic du jour?
Yeah, I realised I forgot my proudest moment. I think similar to Stuart, yeah, over 3 decades in data and analytics. I'm not one of these people who's just joined the industry, so been around for quite a long time. I think back in probably back in the mid 2000s, the company I was working for, we were separating from our parent company after a transaction, divorcing, I think is the way we termed it at the time, and we were given a deadline to move our data platform out of the parent company and into a new data center, which was where all of the new systems were going to be. We had to effectively re-platform, rebuild it, and of course we spent about, well, I say we, the sort of project board spent about 4 or 5 months deciding how to do it and what to do and who to choose, and then we only had 6 months left of the time frame to actually fully build it, test it, parallel run it, and go live. And we went live on the day. And I remember pulling an all-nighter, checking things, testing things, and when the users came in, they went, "It's no different. I just log into a different place. Everything's exactly the same." And that was true. It was in that respect. But in getting there, on the project board, they asked me for a plan B. So what if you're not ready in time, the parent company's going to charge us a load of money. So what's your plan B? So I produced a plan B, and they went, "Yeah, we're not very confident about your plan B. You only need to do a plan C." So I thought, I'm not doing a plan C. I did a plan Z. And it became known as Plan Z. So Plan Z was the plan of last resort, but we never needed to use Plan Z. So always have a Plan Z, don't have a Plan B.
That's a good one, actually. Yeah.
Good.
Avoid getting to Z because you don't know what's coming in between A and Z, right? So,
right.
Brilliant.
I think to your question of data modernisation, what does it mean to me? I think I'll take the data bit out of it, which might annoy some people, but actually for me, it's about what you do with it. So it's about the speed to insight-driven decisions being sort of quicker, being easier, being more accurate from data modernisation. And that's not to say you can't do it if you don't have a modernised data estate. I've been there in a data estate that was held together with sticky back plastic because you had some really good people who knew where to put the sticky tape and where to undo the sticky tape to get, but it was hard work. You didn't feel very agile. You felt quite slow and cumbersome, but you got through it, and hoping eventually someone would put some money up to say, let's modernise it because actually we can make it much quicker, easier, reproducible and accurate. So I suppose that's what that bit means to me. I think the digital transformation, the one thing I've seen is with that is a number of sort of proliferation of sort of tools and products and services that all consume some data and all produce some data. And sometimes they don't really produce some data because actually it's sitting inside the product, and you've got to go through an API or something to get that data out. So one of the things I've seen with a lot of digital transformation is you suddenly end up with 10, 15, 20 different systems, products, services that you've got to go and link into to get a data set to then do some insight and analytics or even reporting. Let's start at the bottom. Let's start at reporting because you've got to get that right. And actually, digital transformation sometimes has made that hard because they've been worrying about the fancy tools and we can, you know, transact online, everything, but forget they can't measure it on day one they go live. Well, they might do. They've got some developers going to run a bit of SQL. And then on day two, someone says developer's left or he's a consultant and he's bored. Actually, they didn't really think about setting up some pipelines, pushing that data into a platform and then measuring things properly.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very relevant. Joe, what about you?
Yeah, really interesting, Graham, hearing that story you had. I think for me, data modernization is about separating data from the systems and thinking about it a bit more agnostically. And typically in the organizations I've worked for, they really struggle to separate conceptually the data from the systems that house it. So just taking that data, moving it across systems, modernizing those systems, of course, maybe that's, moving it to the cloud or starting to think about different types and structures of data other than that standard structured data that we've all sort of grown up with, as it were. So yeah, so it's different systems, of course, but for me, it's thinking about it differently. And so data modernization is something I'm in the process of trying to do with the organization. That's how I see it. How does that relate? Sorry, just to say, in terms of digital transformation, that isn't just systems, but it's people and process as well.
I think that's a good point. And Stuart, from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of echo a little bit of both about what Joel and Graham have just said. Really, I think the way I think about, again, taking data out of the equation a little bit and saying, actually it's about modernisation. For me, it's all about how do you help an organisation drive benefit and advantage for itself, for its stakeholders, through the better use of and maybe improving the use of data. So one of the things that I've wrestled with both as a consultant and working on, if I sort of say on the client side, is getting the right data to the right people at the right time. And I know people we sort of we kind of bandy this around as consultants a lot, but it's absolutely critical. If you can't see it, you're probably not thinking about it, and if you're not thinking about it, you're unlikely therefore to be spending much time keeping it fit for purpose and using it to drive better business decisions. So identifying how to better enable an organisation to function and drive benefits the key for me, and modernisation therefore could relate to any part of that. So that could be it could be the data, it could be the technology the data sits in, but more often than not, it's more about the processes, the people, the organisation, how that's structured, what it's trying to achieve. And so the attitudes and conversations that relate to how data drives decisions, I guess kind of, the approaches to how you manage that kind of flow out of that a little bit. So, if you need to improve a capability or build a service that isn't currently there, you may very well need to get into a more, if you like, technology type conversation around, well, I need to collect all my data in one place, or explicitly, I don't want to collect all my data in one place, but I do need to be able to use some of it to drive a decision. Technology is clearly an enabler, but it's rarely the starting point. And I think how that's kind of, I guess that how that sits with digital transformation, I would say data is really the fuel that powers digital. So digital disruption and transformation, in my view, isn't really new. We've been digitizing content, connecting to networks, talking about disruptive technologies for, well, definitely throughout my entire career, probably beyond that. So, we've clearly seen a much greater impact and explosion of those in the last 10 years or so, with the rise of mobile social media, the quote unquote the internet. Arguably we'll see that explosion continue in the next 10, 20 years. I guess the result of that explosion is that the traditional barriers between stakeholders are perhaps eroded a little bit. More importantly, there's data and there's a lot of it. And whilst having lots of data is great, unless you can really harness the power of it to drive insight and benefit and advantage from it, more data isn't necessarily better. So, do I see the two things inherently linked? Absolutely, because the more you have, the more people kind of go, oh, maybe I should do something about that. What do I do? And it becomes the elephant in the room that you go, I don't really know which bit of that I really want to eat. In fact, I might not want to eat any of it. Help. So you do see some organizations kind of, oh, well, I'm so far behind, I can't get anywhere near it, or and it's a bit of this kind of imposter syndrome around how good am I with my data or not, and should I really transform myself digitally or not, or I can't possibly be disrupted because my industry is immune to all that stuff, which is, and in fact my last client said exactly that, which was, well, we're making loads of money, so why do we have to worry? So we might have to worry this week, but I've just had a look at your business model and I think I might be able to disrupt that quite quickly. And I'm no expert in your industry. So what happens if I was? What would happen there? Yeah. So I think it provides more opportunity, but equally, I think it's also a bit of a threat on the other side of the fence.
That's great. Yeah, we'll come back to some of the points you raised on starting the journeys and things a bit later on. David, you got anything to chip in on that in terms of data modernisation and digital transformation?
Yeah, there's a lot of sensible points made. I guess I'd go in and say, when it comes to modernisation of data, then to me that's an attitude more than anything else. That's about becoming more data driven. That's about taking advantage of the methods as well as the technologies that are currently available, but making the most of it for the actual business outcome that you're trying to achieve at this current moment. And I think that's a continually evolving thing in terms of what it is that you need to do and what technologies you need to use. So keeping abreast of that and making the most of it is fairly key. In terms of how that fits with digital transformation, I find that quite interesting. I'm absolutely with Stuart here. I reckon I'm on my fourth iteration of different types of digital transformation with slightly different titles since my career started. However, I would actually link them together because I think data modernisation is a central pillar to the latest iteration of digital transformation. That move towards SaaS platforms, multiple applications, and then moving on towards composability is very, very key. As you know, Brian, we're interested in being able to provide composable business capabilities through integration and intelligent process automation. And to do that, you have to have a more modern data estate to actually get the benefits for those kinds of outcomes. So I find it, quite fundamentally linked, and that doesn't mean to say that they will stay the same. I think what those terms mean will develop every few years or so in terms of what that kind of outcome people expect from that.
That's great. Thank you, David. Thanks. So just a question here, probably direct this question to Graham and Joel only, because you're two inside organisations, whereas I wouldn't want Stuart or David to incriminate any current clients that we're working with. So the question there is, and start with Joel. Where do you think you are on that data modernisation journey, Joel? Where do you see yourself at the moment?
Pretty nascent, to be honest. I mean, we're like everyone undergoing a digital transformation. We've got a program around it. We're not allowed to give it that name or any name, but we're on a digital transformation program. I moved on to it specifically to drive the data agenda, because from where I was sat within a data analytics team in an IT department of an organization of 10,000 people, we were just going to be, slinging stuff from the periphery and it was just going to bounce off. So how do you start to drive that stuff, right in to drive change in the organization is why I moved on to our transformation program. But it's early days. We're probably 6 months in. We're defining the data governance work stream. We're starting to try and get real senior acceptance that we need data owners, and not just we need lip service to that. Really, we want to be changing people's job descriptions and putting those accountabilities front and center so that people are thinking about it. I'm not sure we're quite there yet. So we're somewhere between some early ideas on what we need to do and starting to make that happen.
Great. And Graham, what about you? Where are you on your modernisation journey?
Interesting. So I think we talked about earlier about what does data modernisation mean, and there's different constituent parts, and I think actually we all resoundingly said it's about the people. And I think the people is sort of two sides to it, which is there's the data team and the range of data professionals you have in a data team, and making sure that they're modernised in terms of the skill sets they've got and their way of thinking, the way of operating, but also your stakeholders. And never mind, I could sit here and say, tick, we've done the platform, great. Actually, tick, we've got a really good data team. And I think a bit like Joel's comment going, actually, I don't think you're ever really finished. And so I think we're probably still, because we've got good foundations, we started 2 years ago. Whilst we weren't digital first, we're still a relatively new business. We moved to sort of digital in terms of transacting, lots of great process behind the scenes, very little manual, all automation. And actually, we can answer questions with data and insight. So whilst in one hand I feel like we're quite far along, I compare it with the fact that I spent 17 years at the AA, who were a very mature organisation, who were very mature in their use of data and analytics, and therefore I know that we're only just scratching the surface. And so my view would be, we've not saying we've got a long way to go, we're still quite immature. That doesn't mean that we're not doing good things, but we're just quite immature in where we are on that scale of exploiting and using the data, and also making sure, I think, to some of the earlier points, that which is where the people side becomes important. So when you put in a new system somewhere, that actually it's the people that communicate and collaborate to tell the data team that there's a new system. Because I spread my team into all the other sort of projects, but it's quite thin. I need to know that you're creating something and that's creating data, and do you want that? You need to get it into their mindset. They don't even ask the question. They almost arrive at your front door and say, here's some data, here's an API, here's an endpoint. You can get data out of this, and this is when it's going to go live. Not someone asks me to do the analysis and I go, where's that data? And they go, it's in that new system. It's been alive for about a year. Can I get data out of it? No. Do you know, that's the bad old days. That's the unmodernized estate. I want to be in the modernized world where the people talk to each other and share, and also that we as a data team can share back to the people inside the company as to why data is important. So we do the sort of all hands, where I stand up and I talk about data products and things that we've built and why they're interesting, and we do a data quiz, to try and get people to remember us. Because there's no point getting them to remember us because I shout at them a lot because they did rubbish, implementation and didn't tell us about data. That's not going to win any friends or any prizes. Actually, you've got to bring them along with you by, having some fun with them sometimes. That's the best way to get change with those sort of things.
Yeah, Graham, I'd absolutely echo that. I think getting senior stakeholders to change the way that they think about what data can do for them and the organisation, there's all sorts of things we can do from the centre and from the bottom up, but actually just changing that thinking from the top down is a real, that's it. If not a generation, we're a decade away from that probably.
It's a relentless thing. I don't think. Having worked at previous company, on the client side, no different to when I was consulting with various organisations. It's you can't really over communicate that stuff, right? It is. You're right. You don't really ever finish. I don't think it's not a thing that you go, oh yeah, I'm just going to come and fix the data, or it'll be all fixed at some point and then we'll be finished and then we'll go and get on with something else that we want to do. It doesn't really happen, does it? So I've seen lots of organizations at various stages of maturity, and some have been at it for years, either on the same journey or because they're having further goes at restarting their journey. And what I would say is that there is a little bit of, and I said it before, I said there's a bit of imposter syndrome where everybody thinks that everybody else is further ahead of the curve than they are, and therefore that they are playing catch up. And whilst there are clearly some leaders, and it's very true to say that if you're not thinking about your data, not just as an essential because you want to stay ahead of the competition, but actually simply just as a license to operate, then you are likely to have a significant problem and you will ultimately be outmaneuvered, I suspect. And the vast majority of organisations I see have a lot of work to do to get up that kind of 5-point scale of greatness. How mature are we really? And I don't think it really matters where you are on that journey, because there's always likely to be room for improvement, be that hygiene factor of, am I really still focused on the right things? Does it really align with strategy? To, I've got absolutely no idea where I need to start with some of this stuff. What am I going to go and do next? And one of my current clients is really at the very front part of that journey. And I think taking a structured approach to it and thinking about it and knowing that that journey is likely to be a long one is a really key thing. But I think you're both right. If you don't bring people along with you and get them to want to play nicely, you'll be flogging a dead horse.
I mean, that's a great segue, Stuart, into what's important. What's an important thing that you should do or can do to modernise the data state, the approach to data, and how do these things add real value in terms of business outcomes? David, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think there's two different things there. So there's the modernisation of data, where we've been talking about the people and the process and the governance and the ongoing cycle that is a circle, absolutely, Stuart, in terms of you're always on this treadmill going around the actual journey over time. Or do you mean modernisation of the data estate? If it's the data estate, then you're getting more into technology, and you need to be thinking in terms of, how can I decrease the amount of effort I need from my individuals by using better tooling? How can I get a better architecture that allows me to have the right platform that allows me to achieve the actual outcomes I want to with my business? And when we get people who are on that journey, from those who are using bits of paper and using spreadsheets and want to go right the way from the start, through to people who are thinking more in terms of changing their data strategy to actually meet the overall outcomes and having multiple streams of activity along that. So yeah, so I think if it's the estate, it's more into, okay, well, what are your actual architectural elements going to be? How can you improve productivity? That would be my thought.
Right. And Joel, we'll come back to the bit about organisation and data in that context. But picking up on David's points there about the data estate and some of the technologies and platforms that are using, what do you think is important? Some of the most important things you can be doing, and how does that actually add value to the outcomes you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so I mean, I think talking about the data estate, I mean, we've been entirely in Azure for probably the best part of 5 years now as an organisation, which is great. You get some of the obvious stuff: accessibility, disaster control, uptime, all of that kind of stuff that comes with the cloud. I think for me, where it's starting to come out is, we'll come back to that data ownership, data governance piece, is without data owners, we don't have a full range of data policies. And without data policies, you can't, for example, switch on some of the bells and whistles that come with Azure around sort of data security and stuff like that, because you've got no written down rules to apply. So there really is some opportunities there. Just that ought to be quick win stuff. Write the data policies, and then you can switch on the tools that enact them. But without the policies, you can't switch the tools on. So I think that's an area where we could gain some value pretty quickly.
How do you balance that though with not spending, boiling the ocean, if you like, on those things, and you actually do just enough from policies and governance perspective to get going and get moving and get the momentum going, and not drown yourself in that sort of potential bureaucracy that provides?
Good question. I think to probably some Stuart's points as well about there's just so much everywhere. Where do we start? For me, having a transformation program, we are focused on we're putting in a new HR system. And we're putting in Dynamics F&P. So we've got some scope there that we can just start to say, well, hey, let's not try and boil the ocean. Let's just go at those things to start with. There'll be some benefits that just start to ripple out, but also we'll be able to take some experience and learning into the wider approach.
Great. Graham, what's your perspective on this in terms of important things and how that adds value?
Yeah, it's funny. I was similar to David in terms of I sort of read it as I read your question as like, is it the physical estate? So is that all about the tools? And I definitely would advocate cloud, having been an on-premise man for many, many years, and hear about all this cloud stuff, and then get to experience it and go, this is great. You know, I can turn it up, turn it down. I can spend as much as little. You know, it's still quite complicated. It's not as simple as everyone thinks. And also, I think the thing I've learned is, I remember being at a company where they bought the best of every tool, and they spent millions of pounds on integrators integrating the best tools, and couldn't get the best tools to communicate to each other. So actually, sometimes you just need to choose a bit of a family of tools. So in our case, you know, we're using you know, sort of Microsoft family, which has everything from, you know, a data platform to visualization, etc. But you know, sticking within the tool, that you get advantages within that. I think my real answer to the question is back to this people thing, and I think I would say, I remember once being asked to read a book, and it was all about sort of data strategy, and they asked me to write a sort of chapter, and I sort of started this chapter about building a team to sort of exploit your data estate and also build your data estate. And I said, you know, you can do the, you know, I'm sorry to have the football analogy, but you can do the Man City option, which is, if you go back a few years, they bought the best players in the world, put them in a team, and won nothing. Won absolutely nothing for several years because they had a bunch of stars. You can put some good players who work well together in a team, and I'd say the same for a data team. You need to have some good engineers, some good analysts, some good scientists, all the skill set, have a good bunch of people. You know, if you're a bit weak in one area, actually, you know, I've had some very strong analysts who could make up for maybe some weaker engineers to start with, and vice versa. But actually, you need that good team across all of the data disciplines, and that's the thing for me that has definitely helped me most in most recent years.
And that bit about having the team and the rest of it, I think you know, bringing that together. We talk about. Well, we coined a term, data parenting, and did a paper on data parenting, which was a bit of a blend between how organisations look after the data, but also how they look after the people that are supposed to be managing that data as well. Those two things together. Have you got any examples of sort of, if you like, your craziest things that you've seen when it comes to data parenting within the organisations that you've worked with? Examples of things that just are nonsensical, perhaps?
You know what? When David first introduced the concept to me, I hadn't heard it before, to be honest, and I had to go and read his article, and I thought, yeah, it was a little bit linear for me in some respects, you know, because let's be honest, people regress, and you can go backwards, you know, but generally for most, it's similar to sort of, I suppose, data, in that it tends to go through that sort of, you know, growing up, maturing, but equally, and this is where I suppose the where it's gone crazy, or maybe it's been a disaster. What I have seen, and I've seen it happen to companies that I was at, that I left, and I've seen it happen to other companies, that when the leader or the leadership team disappears from that organization, you can often see the sort of data discipline, the knowledge, etc., just crumbles. You know, I was at the AA for a long time. We had a big team, and in the time I left, or the time I was serving my notice, more people resigned because I had the longest notice period, and I think we lost half of the experience in data years in the company in 6 months. And that was a lot of knowledge. And what you see later on is, you know, I was data leader for 17 years. They've had 6 data leaders in 5 years, or 5 data leaders in 6 years, can't remember which way around it is. And, you know, they've all been, you know, good, and they've come in and they've tried to do something, but it hasn't worked, and then they've left for whatever reason. And you talk to people left behind trying to get stuff done, you know, the product people and the marketing people who want support, going, it's a mess. We don't know where to go to. We don't know the answer. It's not like it was before. And it's like, yeah, you suddenly realize that it can go horribly wrong, you know, in the same way as, I suppose, parenting, you know, the kids grow up and then suddenly they become, you know, delinquents or something. I don't know. It's not that different, I suppose, than parenting.
I think I was going to chip in with a football analogy, which it sounds more like the multiple Premier League managers never getting anywhere all of a sudden after being successful for many years. And I won't mention Man United at that point. And also from a parenting analogy point of view, I think it's midlife crisis and going back to being a teenager is what you just described. But there we are. That's my take on it.
Stuart, you gave me some quite good feedback. But what about crazy things have you seen?
How long we got?
Short.
So I always think I've seen everything there is to see, and then I go into a new organisation and I have my horizons broadened for me. It's probably the polite way of putting it. But I think that's part of what makes it a really interesting space to be in, because you really, when you talk about data, and we've talked about people, but I see data as a people problem. It's a people problem, and therefore, because people are interesting and different and have different approaches, they take different approaches and they behave in a different way. And so actually, data modernisation or data parenting is a very human discipline in many.
Oh, you got on mute.
No, you've lost me. No, I'm back again. Yeah, so it's quite a human discipline in many respects, and I guess I characterise quite a lot of what I do as kind of social work, where you find yourself going into an organisation and going, well, there, it'll be all right. Honestly, you're not the only people to have seen things happen this way. Craziest moment, I really would be picking from a very deep pool. I think, without kind of naming any particular names, I've seen countless organisations spend huge sums hiring very expensive data science teams to quote unquote make us data driven, and then finding out or wondering why that hasn't really fixed the problem. And the football manager analogy is a really good one, because the amount of time you actually have to quote unquote make a difference seems to be getting shorter and shorter and shorter as the pace of, if you like, digital transformation picks up. So people's patience seems to become thin, and you certainly see organisations trying to jump to, well, just fix my problem, just get me to the answer, without wanting to build the foundations in a rigorous way. I think is probably the way I would describe it. So you tend to find that if you hire in a data scientist and they can't get access to the data they need, or they've got little or no confidence in that data, they're going to spend 80% or more of their time trying to source the data. Or even worse, I've seen data science teams tweaking their algorithms, brackets which aren't very well documented, to get to an answer that the business finds palatable, and then the business makes a bet on that because that seems to be about the right answer, as opposed to, but what is the data actually telling me, and do I really have trust in that? Is it really transparent? And I think that for me fundamentally fails to address the underlying problems of which data do I have, why do I have it, should I have it, is it of acceptable condition, do I know how I'm going to use it, what outcomes am I going to expect, do I trust it, do my stakeholders trust it, does it drive value for me as an organization? And I think that kind of chuck a bunch of money, and you can equally say the same thing about chuck a bunch of money at some really expensive tooling. It won't fix your problem unless you take a rigorous approach to what am I actually trying to achieve. And the teaming thing's a really important one, because you don't want just a team of data ninjas, right? You want some people that can speak to people as well, right? So you want the change management aspect is massive. So you've got to have this kind of multifaceted team that can kind of embed itself and blend in with, and I'll say the rest of the business, but actually you're all part of the same, you're all part of the same organization anyway, generally speaking. So rather than being an afterthought, that's really important, because that's where you can really start to address, well, what are we collectively trying to achieve, as opposed to, oh, the data team are going to fix that for me, or why haven't the data team fixed that for me? Actually, I would turn, and I have done in my last role, turn the question around again. No, your data, what are you going to do, right? What do you need to do? How are you going to address this? Don't just point the finger at the data guys and go, they will magically pull a rabbit out of the hat, because it doesn't work that way.
And Joel, I mean, that does that resonate with you? And what crazy moments have you experienced?
It does resonate with me, and I think a lot of the conversation is focused around the cultural aspect to it, and that's right. That's why it's so hard just to bring in and affect change, and it's difficult to do it quickly. I mean, I've worked in an organisation where there was a subset of people who were deemed too important to have to worry about creating good data, even though they were creating core data for the organisation. And so another team was started up. I used to call them the data fairies, but I think data parenting is probably a better kind of term. But actually, yeah, just to talk about the data fairies going around fixing people's, rather than actually these people being coached and supported to change it. And whether there's some system validation, whether there's some process changes, whether there's some mindset changes, maybe it's a bit of all of that, but actually just bringing in, rather than fixing the problem, bringing people in to keep topping up the leaky bucket was just struck me as crackers.
Yeah, it's good. David, you got anything to add on that bit before we move into the final?
No, not really. It's difficult to follow up with these guys because they've covered most of the aspects of the topic.
That's good. Great. So let's just say, so the whole area of data, much like we originally touched on digital transformation as well, this whole area of data field is full of buzzwords and abbreviations and acronyms and the rest of it. From where you come from, and maybe we'll start with Joel this time. What are some of the terms that you hear at the moment, or things that are being hotly debated that you're most cautious about, and why?
Well, I mean, there's one. It's not a new one, but it's always sat uncomfortably with me, or I've just thought, the term big data, I've just never really bought into it. I mean, I get what it is and why it's described, and the various V-word adjectives, that go around to describe it. But I just think it's still data. I mean, describing it now as big data, I think people just need to sit back a bit and just say, it's just the way data is nowadays, because, there is so much more of it and so many more systems, and it can be created in different ways, and Web 2.0 and Web 3, and it's going to keep coming. It's more just a kind of a neo-modern description of data. So I'm not a big fan of the term big data, although I get why it's there.
David, what's yours?
Oh, well, there's a term going around at the moment, and Stuart's going to smile at this because we talked about it the other week, which I thoroughly enjoy. But all I'm going to say is that when it comes to something such as data mesh, and when you see people's advertising around that, then always look at it and just see if you can substitute the word magic for the actual term at hand. And then, if it still makes sense and is perfectly plausible in exactly the same way as previously, then probably you need to think more about the topic. That would be my favourite one of the moment.
I do remember that conversation.
and I'm sorry it's that particular one, but I've still not got my head around what people think that is.
Stuart, what's yours then?
Yeah, I mean, both of those. I mean, big data. My dad used to say to me, it's not big and it's not clever. And just because it's big, it's not clever. And I'm kind of going, yeah, do you know what? That applies to data as well. You can have as much data as you like. If you're not driving any insight from it, frankly, who cares, right? It's just a number. I think data people have a bit of a bad habit, right? And I'll stick my hand up and say I'm probably I fall into that category, because we have a habit of taking a term, putting data in front of it, not being able to consistently explain to non-data literate folk what we mean by it, and then wondering why we feel a bit misunderstood. So you kind of go, oh, it's not condition, it's data condition, or it's not value, it's data value, or it's not governance, it's data governance. And you go, actually, why would you expect a non-data literate person to really understand? Actually, if I go and speak to most of my associates in the data world, would we all agree over what data governance really means? No, we could have a 53-hour conversation about it and still not come out with the answer. So we kind of our own thing. But the one thing that really is driving me senselessly nutty is data mesh at the minute. It's very emperor's new clothes. It's a massive bit of marketing bingo. It seems to require a bottomless pit of money and an endless supply of patience and some technologies that haven't even been invented yet to do some things that we've been trying to do for years, which is how do I integrate my data more effectively? But the thing that really drives me insane with it is that it misses, even if you could solve all the technical issues with it, it doesn't address the critical problems of, do you know what the value of your data are? Do you understand what you're trying to achieve with it? And do you understand what your data means? How is it defined? Do you really understand it? That's all supposed to be self-governing. I have never seen anything self-govern, data or otherwise, ever. It just doesn't happen. So at the moment, whole conferences on it. I mean, David and I were at one the other day. I came out of the data mesh conversation. I've been in data, integration for a very long time, and I was more confused when I came out of it, and I had to go and read some books to kind of work out what this lady was talking about. And I genuinely, I came out of it thinking, no, I actually do prefer. And every time I see the word data mesh, I can just hear David saying magic. And yeah, absolutely.
Sorry for that, but I can also chip in self-documenting when it comes to things as well as self-integrating and self-governing. So there you go.
Yeah.
Graham, have you got any other terms, or do you want to lay into data mesh as well?
Just on self-documenting, I tell you what, I remember seeing a self-documenting, and it was just garbage. I mean, it was written by a 3-year-old. I think the quality of it. No, I'm afraid I would maybe not quite as severe go at mesh and fabric, because I did actually have to recently Google what is the difference, and there is somebody has almost produced like a side-by-side comparison. You go, oh, is that it? It's a bit like upgrading to an iPhone 14 when you've got an iPhone 13. There's like a couple of little things and a bit of a fundamental maybe, but there's very little different. It's just a bit of a fundamental about how it operates, etc.
Isn't fabric Gartner and mesh not Gartner? That's the way I understood it to be, but I might be wrong.
You're being harsh there, Stuart. I've been a bit harsh there.
Do apologize.
But no, I think, and I certainly would mention the G word, that they do overly hype stuff, and then the vendors jump on the back of it. I did actually see a presentation. I don't think it was the one that that Dave and Stuart were talking about. A presentation on it at a large media company has put it in place. I think they've done it for good reasons, which is they're trying to make better use of data. They would spend 3 years, 5 years building something physical, cloud, whatever. So actually, they're going down the mesh route. But even the consultants that co-presented with them, when someone asked them a question, can you show me an architecture? They said no. Why not? It's not, why would you not show us the architecture and the tools and things, the vendors that you've used and integrated for this company? No, we can't do it. And I kept impressed. And eventually they said, we'll have a private conversation afterwards. It's like, really? So you can't show an architecture for the implementation of mesh at this very large media company? But you'll do it on a one-on-one basis privately, which made me suspicious that it
requires you to pay.
Yeah, I think the other thing they've done is, which I think is clever, it may backfire, which is they've identified sort of individual use cases, and they're sort of picking them off, saying, right, so this use case, and they talked about it from this use case is to be able to send CRM alerts, blah blah blah. Next one is to be able to do operational stuff, to do this. So they've got a whole series of things they want to do. And the advantage to them is, I think, they're decommissioning manual, antiquated, broken things. And so they're just saying, well, over time, and it's, I think it was quite a long time, they'll move everything across. Now, whether it works or they find, that mesh doesn't work for them, I would say they did seem to have quite a strong governance, and the guy leading the whole sort of enterprise I've sort of known at previous organizations has quite a strong governance bone. So maybe they'll be the success. I think for lots of others, they're just seeing it as a something to jump on. Means we don't have to put all our data in one place. We can do this mesh thing, can't we? And that solves it. Job done.
Great. Let's close out now and just talk about, so what advice have you got for anybody that's embarking on a data modernization journey? Where would you start, or where have you started? Graham, do you want to?
I think I would say don't listen to what everyone else has bought. I think find what your challenges and problems are, and then research what are the potential solutions, tool sets, etc. that you can use. And some of those solutions aren't, as we talked about earlier, aren't tools. They're people, they're practices. It's putting in place, and it is about that end to end. So don't just see it as, and it's one of the reasons I think, I saw someone recently advertise for I think it was a CDO to lead the data transformation reporting to the CIO, and I just thought, no offense, I just think that's the wrong place for it. If this is a data transformation, there's a danger it'll just look at the technology. They may not, but there's a danger they have a very technology focused, and it needs to be taken out of that area and say, actually, as much of this is about business transformation and how they consume data and insight, not just the technology and the people to make it happen. I think my last thing would be, and I think we touched upon it earlier, which is make sure you've got that exec buy-in. I've experienced personally when the exec, the CEO stands up and says our strategy is based on data, and he has a one-pager that has data in the middle and all decisions, marketing, product based on data, then as a data team you arrived. When you're 6 levels down the organization and you report to the caretaker, the data function has not arrived. In fact, you've departed. And I think just getting that exec buy-in, having that person on the board that is going to be your supporter, not someone who says it but actually does it, lives and breathes and stands up for you and protects you, gets you the money you need, etc. Or it's you, as in get a CDO and get them to do it for you.
Right, thank you. Stuart, quickly from you.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of absolutely agree with what Graham said there. I mean, I would say take a very deep breath. That would be the thing I would say to people about embarking on that journey. It won't be straightforward. It will be long. You need to be prepared to learn a lot, because you are not going to know it all when you first set out on it. Change management is always underestimated, and is arguably the most important. It doesn't happen overnight. So someone says, well, I'm going to modernize my data, or I'm going to become data driven. Doesn't happen overnight. And we kind of said before, legacy organizations often try and compete with startups who very often don't have the heritage or process spaghetti, or whatever you want to call it, of established businesses. Yeah, exactly. And so people want quick answers and quick value, and then they're surprised when actually the answer is not that simple. It's not always clear to businesses what being data driven means. So what modernization really means. It's also pretty unrealistic, I think, to expect senior business leaders. I mean, there are very few that kind of get it, and to understand or have a clear view of what they need. And Graham's mentioned CDO roles. I saw one the other day that was must be able to do CXO speak, but also needs to be fluent in Python. I'm like, well, it can't be both of those, right? It's one or the other. So the number of times I've heard the phrase is, can you fix the data, or we want to be data driven, but then when you pick into it, there's very little common understanding of what that really means, or where to start, or which data needs fixing. So you need to be able to articulate the agenda in a language that the business understands and really can relate to. And whilst quick wins are always important, they always need to be driving towards a North Star. So, data isn't a reflection of the organisation. It really is what makes the organisation tick. And so don't treat it as a nice to have. Don't treat it as a sidebar. Set out a shared vision of what, in really simple terms, if you can't remember what your 4 or 5 key objectives are in your data strategy off the top of your head, then and you're not kind of living those all the time, then you don't really have a strategy that can stand up, because people are going to forget about it and it's going to go and collect dust somewhere on a shelf. So I would say, go into it with very open eyes and a very open mind,
and be really clear what you're trying to do. Joel, what would you start with?
Wow, I don't think there's much I can add to that. I think that's between Graham and Stuart. You've pretty much covered it, but it isn't really about technologies. It's people and process. It's cultural. Start at the top. Be really clear about what you're trying to do with the data. What strategic objectives is it driving? Can you get in there and quantify that stuff? That's really important. We've struggled actually with some of that, and you know, it's not to say that it's not going well, but you know, really just tying it in at that, really keying it in at that high level. Definitely not about systems. I mean, you can bring in a shiny new bucket, but if you just fill it with the same old swamp water you had before, you've just got a shiny new bucket of swamp water. That's not what anyone sets out for. So yeah, it starts with the data and the, well, it doesn't start with the data, it starts with the people, but then data systems and technology and stuff is down the line.
And I often look at this and think that actually people should start with a conscious view of what the data architecture is that they want to achieve. Go back to your point about purpose, Stuart, and Graham and Joel, really. Just, you know, being clear about what you're trying to get out of it, and then consciously thinking about your data architecture to support that. David, you got any closing comment?
Well, once again, it's very difficult to follow Graham and Stuart and Joel when they've been waxing lyrical. But I would say, you know, in support of getting the right stakeholder is make sure that you aim low, hit the target, understand that use case and that it's relevant for an outcome, build out your business case, make sure that you've got a good hypothesis, don't spend too long on that, and iterate through and learn as much as you can. That way you can build out to something. Yeah, too many people will try and do too much or tell no one, in which case they won't get the buy-in. So yeah,
that's great.
Start at the beginning.
Yeah. Great, guys. Thank you very much for your time. That's been excellent discussion there. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Stuart. Thank you, Graham.
Thanks for inviting us on.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.